Joining us now is former senator and top-tier candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Jeannemarie Davis. Jeannemarie, always a pleasure to have you with us right here on the John Fredericks Show.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much, John.
Okay, Jeannemarie, now I got to get to this mailer that hit on Monday, and what was odd about it is another one of these bogus, illegal attack ads that nobody puts their name on it. And the title of the mailer was Virginia's spending has grown by 66% in the last decade. That was side one, and blah, blah, blah. They got some facts and figures. Then you go to the back side of it, and that's kind of interesting because they got a big check mark by Corey Stewart, and then they got a big X through yourself, Steve Martin, Scott Ligenfelter, basically saying you guys were responsible for increasing spending in the General Assembly when you were there by 66%. And this is put out by the Virginians for Limited Government, who we can't find out who they are. So it's a negative ad on yourself, pro-Stewart, put out by this bogus Virginians for Limited Government. What's going on here?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very apparent in these negative pieces of mail that are sent out by organizations that really don't exist. They're shadow organizations. You might recall that Scott had one that was sent out against him several weeks ago from some group called Americans for Growth and Opportunity. And, of course, when you try to find them, you can't either. The thing that's interesting about this piece that came out is it has a return address, and I looked into where that return address is, and it's an apartment building that's just been renovated. Every one of the units are up for sale. I think it's been converted from an apartment building to condos, and that tells me that nobody lives at this address. They just found an address with no occupants and used that as the return address, which only clearly indicates that this is a shadow organization that doesn't really exist. And we're seeing more and more of it. I think the thing that's so tragic, and I'll address this piece in a minute, but the thing that's so tragic is we have 7 candidates. We've had many forums, many opportunities for individual candidates to bring up or raise issues about any of the other candidates in a forum where they can respond. And instead of taking that opportunity, we must have had 16 of those forums. Instead, what they choose to do is to create these shadow organizations that don't exist, slap some logo on a piece of mail and send it out. And I just think it's a shame that we have 1 or 2. It's hard to tell who's behind this. There's every indication that it could be 1 or 2 that have the resources to do this. But it's just a shame that instead of just coming out and having an honest debate, they choose to be backhanded and to send information out this way, most of which really isn't true. And I think that whoever is doing this, it speaks very ill of their integrity and their character, and it's certainly not the kind of person we want serving in state government, whether it's from the House of Delegates level up to the governor's level. You want someone you can trust, and anyone who would campaign in this manner is not a decent person, not a person of integrity, and you certainly don't want that individual serving and representing you and making decisions that are important to your life.
Well, Jeannemarie, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And, you know, you look at this mailer, and I've got a couple questions. I'm going to get to the actual falsehoods in the mailer in a second, but I want to focus right now on your point, which is it's an integrity, it's a character issue. Somebody is going to be nominated for lieutenant governor in 10 days. That's the second spot on the ticket. This is a national race. All eyes are going to be on it, so you can't have these kind of shenanigans. All right, the mailer that went out is a pro-Corey Stewart mailer. It's got a big check mark by his name, great picture behind a flag. So obviously whoever put it out is for Corey Stewart, negative against yourself, Steve Martin, Senator, and Delegate Scott Ligenfelter. Now, we trace the mail house, and the mail house is Pinnacle. And here's my question. Corey Stewart has used Pinnacle Mail House as recently as 2012 in the past, so we tie him back to that. And if he indeed did not send this despicable mailer out, where he doesn't have the courage to put his name on it, as you said, then how did it get through his mail house? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, if he knew nothing about it, why wouldn't he be all over the media saying, hey, I disavow it, I don't have anything to do with it, I'm going to get to the bottom of it. Instead, we hear silence from Corey Stewart. What do you make of that?
Well, in all fairness, I'm going to tell you that Corey did call me yesterday to talk with me about it. He told me that he did not have anything to do with it. And so it's very hard to ascertain who does these things. I think with all of the hoopla about Corey and the negative mail again, and the calls and the YouTube videos about Pete and all of that, the blogs have been kind of pointing their fingers at Corey. I'll tell you, I don't know that this piece helps Corey. I think in light of all of the negative publicity there's been last week about perhaps with those that are making accusations that he's been behind the past, that this actually plays into all of this and makes it look worse for him instead of better. And so it could be someone else who is using this opportunity to put him in that position. The thing that's interesting is that when you look at the indicia, whoever did this paid first-class mail, not bulk rate. And so it was very important to whoever sent this out that it arrived when it arrived. They didn't want it to arrive next week. They wanted it to arrive right in the middle of this big brouhaha, if you will, about past negativity and the accusations that have been aimed his way. So I can't honestly say who has sent it and who didn't. There's no telling. And I will say that we can file a complaint with the State Board of Elections, but when you're using a shadow organization that doesn't exist, and I've Googled Virginians for Limited Government. They have a website. They say they're not a nonprofit, but there are no principals listed. There's no address listed. There's no phone number listed. And it's copyrighted 2013, which tells me that this was just created this year for this purpose. The sad fact is a Commonwealth attorney or even the State Board of Elections really can't do anything in researching all of this because there just isn't an easy way to figure out who these folks are and what's going on here. But I would say to people who are listening this, when you get a piece of mail and it's not from a candidate and it's for Virginians for this or Americans for that, don't believe it. We are seeing more and more that these are just shadow organizations that are created by a candidate or someone who supports a candidate or someone who doesn't like a candidate. They use this, they stick this on as their return address and they mail it out. And there are always inconsistencies in what is in this piece of mail, out and out lies sometimes. And so I would say if it doesn't come from a candidate with their authorization on the piece of mail, I would just pitch it where it belongs in the circular file and not give any credence to it because 9 times out of 10, well, I'm going to say 10 times out of 10 so far, it just is leading you astray. And so I hope people are aware of that and will just not pay any attention to these.
This is the John Fredericks Show. We're with former state senator in Northern Virginia, Jeannemarie Davis. She's a Republican. She's one of 7 candidates vying for the Republican nomination for lieutenant governor. That'll be decided in 10 days. Senator Davis, let me ask you this. These illegal ads attacking yourself, Legenfelter, Steve Martin, Pete Snyder got hit with one of these illegal video ads that we think we trace back to the Stewart campaign. I mean, I'm getting a little concerned because I just had on Sean Kenny, the political editor of Bearing Drift, who basically said on the air that Corey Stewart's campaign manager, one Patrick Lee, was fired for unethical behavior, something to do with a cell phone. He used to work for OpenChain, and he got a hold of one of Rob Bell's cell phones. My question is, you've run a pretty positive campaign. Let me just ask you this straight out, okay? Would you hire a campaign manager who was fired for unethical behavior and stealing?
I would make the personal decision not to hire a person. But I'm just going to say I don't know anything about that situation. It's the first that I've heard of it, and I'm just not going to comment on Patrick or Corey personally in that regard because I don't know anything about the situation or the circumstances. I've always been very careful about who's on my team, and if we have ever had an indication that there's a member of our team, whether it's this race or the races that I ran in the House and in the Senate, of their integrity, then I have let them go. I don't want to be associated or affiliated with someone who I can't trust to run the positive campaign that I would like to put forward and that I've been working very hard to do. So I can't comment on Patrick. I don't know him well enough or the circumstances to comment. But personally, I want my team to be folks that are working hard, focused on the goal, that are positive, getting our positive message out. And no, I would have to let someone go if they behaved in the manner you described. But once again, that's not a judgment on Patrick. I don't know that set of circumstances.
Former state senator Jeannemarie Davis. She's a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor. Senator Davis got this mailer comes out. It says that yourself, Steve Martin, Scott Ligenfeld. You got big X's by your names. Not the best pictures, I would say, either, but that always happens. And it says all three were members of the General Assembly when the state budget increased 66% in the last decade. Well, I checked this out. Number one, Steve Martin never voted for any budget that I can tell. And then secondly, I don't think you were in the General Assembly the whole 10 years, if memory serves me correct.
Well, I was only in the General Assembly from 2002 through 2007. And so I was only in the General Assembly the first 5 of these 10 years. And I think clearly what they're trying to do is to just say, well, they served in the General Assembly, so they're guilty by association. But when you look at the fact that Steve almost never voted for a budget, and that I was only in the first half of those 10 years, Scott Lingenfelter, and I have voted against a budget or two myself when I didn't like the direction it was going, and Scott's the same way. He's voted against many budgets also. And so this is a very misleading piece because it's attempting to say that the three of us are responsible for this growth when, in fact, we have voted against budgets, and heck, I wasn't even there the last 5 years. So that's patently, just not fair. It also doesn't account for growth in population or inflation when they're using these numbers, so there's no discussion about that. And so I think that that's an unfair depiction of what has happened. And lastly, Ken Cuccinelli, Rob Obenshain,
Right.
Mark Obenshain, Rob Bell, they all served in the General Assembly during this time period.
Right.
They are fiscal hawks, and we all know that. And so, to put out a blanket statement that, you served during a portion of or part of this time, regardless of whether you voted against the budgets because you thought they were growing too quickly, it's just outrageous. And this piece doesn't even say they voted for this budget or that budget, or they voted for this growth or that growth. They're just saying, hey, they served in the General Assembly. They must be held responsible. And I think it's just a real stretch.
I mean, it's a blanket inquisition, and I think to your point, to lump everybody in simply because the budget went up. Bob McDonnell was in the General Assembly during that time. Ken Cuccinelli, as you say, was in the General Assembly during that time. Mark Obenshain, Rob Bell, they were all in there. So that doesn't make any sense at all. Now, 3 of you were targeted. That's 3. There's 7 people in the race. Pete Snyder, the entrepreneur and businessman, he got targeted last week. So that's 4 of the 7. Corey Stewart's picture is on this. So, I mean, you just start narrowing down the odds and you have to start to ask questions. My question is, if you're going to be the nominee for lieutenant governor in a nationally watched race, don't you think that the person playing number 2 on the ticket has to bring something to the table, whether it's job creation, ability to raise funds, diversity? I don't see where somebody who's putting these negative ads out is going to do anything but drag this ticket down. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you completely. And I do want to go back to the conversation that I had with Corey yesterday. Corey adamantly denied that he had anything to do with this. The fact that he picked up the phone to call me directly was important. But in the course of our conversation, I did recommend very highly and advised him to send an email out to all of the delegates, letting them know that he's not behind this, and repeating what I've just said to you. Hey, Jeannemarie wasn't in the General Assembly but half of those years. Steve Martin and Scott Lingenfelter are known for voting against budgets. And so this is a misleading piece of mail. And he listened. He said it was good advice. I hope that he'll follow through on it. I think that'll go a long way in helping him try to convince folks that this isn't him that's behind this. All you can do is offer advice and hope that someone will listen to it. But I think that would be an important next step for Corey as he is trying very hard to convince people that this is not him that's behind these negative things. And I'll say this, too. Just because a person has been hit in one way or another prior doesn't mean that they're not also engaging in this and that they don't have something to do with another piece of mail. It's unfortunate that so much of this is going on right now. I think it's a shame. And once again, I think it speaks highly of the character and integrity of whoever is behind these mail pieces and these negative phone calls.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's this particular piece is a anti-Martin Davis Lingenfelter piece and a pro-Corey Stewart piece. So nobody's going to put something out and then spend money to say how great Stewart is. Look, I think you called him on it. It's very telling. We're going to see if indeed Corey Stewart is going to come clean and apologize for this. I'm going to ask the other candidates to do the same, and we'll see how it plays out. Jeannemarie Davis, for people that want to get more info on your campaign, where do they go? What do they do?
My website is Jeannemarie, 4lg.com. So that's Jeannemarie, 4lg.com. And I will say, if you got this negative piece, do not spell Jeannemarie the way they did on this piece, because it isn't spelled properly. And I think that hurts more than anything, that they couldn't even get my name right. But
right.
I hope you'll go visit my website, and I look forward to greeting every single delegate in Richmond in just 10 days.
Senator Jeannemarie Davis, thanks for being with us, and we'll have you on again before this is over, and we'll see you on the 18th. Good luck.
Thanks so much, John. Good to talk with you as always.
Always a pleasure. Okay, that's Jeannemarie Davis. She has called out Corey Stewart and asked him to make a public apology. So far, we haven't seen hide nor hair that. So we're gonna stay on all these people, because we got to get to the bottom of it. And if we don't do it,